All right, BJ, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just kind of want to start at the beginning, from the beginning of your story. What's your relation to Wichita, and go from there?
Well, I've been in Wichita since I was 2 years old, so 1977.
Yeah.
That basically makes it my home.
Yeah. Yep.
And, really love Wichita. It's where I grew up, went to Wichita State, and went to Friends.
Okay.
So met my wife at South High.
All right.
And so we're very much Wichita.
Yeah.
And through actually the graduate school, I met Jeremy Johnson, Johnson's Garden Center.
Oh, yeah.
And he introduced me to Rick, now my business partner. And he said, Rick has plans for a brewery in El Dorado. Now, he wants to make it in Wichita, but El Dorado had a lot more water.
Sure.
Qualities that we wanted, the limestone around the lake, and there's the right pH, the right salinity and everything. And he says, you should talk to Rick. And I said, okay. And so instead of putting a brewery in Delano, we put a brewery in El Dorado.
All right.
And so we call it Wichita Light in beer terms.
Yeah. So real quick step back. So Wichita State, you had a bachelor in elementary education. So what was the plan? What were you what did you want to do? Elementary education, apparently like certain grades. What were you thinking back then?
So I did elementary ed and early childhood, and the family business was a daycare center.
Okay.
And so it was about 250 kids and 35 staff. And I really enjoyed doing that. But at some point, mom and dad were comfortable with, one location. And I said, well, I'd like to expand. And as you get older, you get a little more risk averse as you get closer to retirement. And so they just really wanted to stay with one. I said, well, I'm going to do my own thing. I'm pretty good at drinking beer. So I'm going to go try to make a brewery.
Sure.
And I did not brew, actually. That was Rick.
Question.
Yeah. So Rick's been to brewing school. He's a first level Cicerone. He's his BJCP certified beer judge. Like, he knows his stuff.
Oh yeah. Very cool. So did you ever consider brewing on your own, or was it just, I'll let the professionals do that and I'll focus on what I'm good at?
Yeah, I really, it crossed my mind, but it was one of those things that I knew the learning curve was steep, and Rick had, 20, 25 years into it. So just doing numbers, I said, I'm going to let Rick do that, and I'll handle the marketing and business side at that point. So.
Yeah, for sure. So you guys met, and then kind of what were the first steps? How early in the conversation was like, hey, let's start a brewery together? It was like drinking some beers, and then that came up. How did that process go?
Well, when I went out to meet him, I really thought his beer wasn't going to be good because everybody has a friend that makes beer. And so I just thought, man, this beer's going to suck. So
a lot of it does.
Right. A lot of the Walnut River.
A lot of the home brewers. The Walnut River stuff's all gold.
No, I'm just giving you a hard time. And so when I went out there, I expected that to happen. And we were drinking a beer in what's now the canning line area at the brewery. Mm-hmm. And I said, this doesn't suck. He's like, thanks. I was like, no, I mean, that's really good. And so that's high praise at the brewery now, is if you say this doesn't suck.
Yeah.
Then
it's drinkable.
Absolutely. So yeah.
So how far along was he? Was he like making big batches, small batches, medium? How much?
So he was making about a keg at a time, roughly, which was for homebrew was decent size.
Yeah.
And he had an apartment there, and his plan was to turn the downstairs into a brew pub, and then to live upstairs. That's what he wanted to do.
That'd be awesome.
And I said, I believe in your product. I'll help you find an investor. I don't ever want to own a restaurant. I'm out.
Mm-hmm. That's fair, yeah.
And you see where that got us. Mm-hmm. So for a year, I helped him try to find investors and set up meetings. And I finally said, what if I invested, but we didn't do a restaurant? Because I knew the failure rate was high on restaurants.
Yeah.
So we decided to go ahead and make a go of it on a 2-barrel system, which is 62 gallons at a time.
Okay.
And So yeah, it seems to have worked out, I guess.
Sure. So I guess what is a barrel in beer terms?
A barrel is 31 gallons.
Okay, interesting. I work in the oil industry, and so it's 42 gallons.
Okay.
So it's interesting. I was curious if it was the same metric, but it's not quite the same. Interesting.
It's different for bourbon. Every barrel is a unit of measurement is very different.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So I guess it's you and Rick, and who else is on the team right now?
And then Travis. Travis is the microbiologist. He's worked in ethanol and pharmaceutical.
Wow.
He's a pretty sharp dude.
Yeah.
That he's also a brewer.
Yeah.
Not as much by trade, but by home brewing and whatnot.
Sure.
But he certainly knows what works and doesn't work in beer. But he handles all the packaging, the lab. We've got a lab upstairs at the brewery, and that's all under him.
Yeah, and you guys have very diverse backgrounds. How has that worked out? Kind of having complementary or different backgrounds?
They are complementary, and nobody wants to do the other one's job, so it works out really well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
What does your day-to-day look like?
I'm all over the board.
Yeah.
I will spend a few days of the week at the Pourhouse, a few days at the main brewery in El Dorado, and then either in the market or sometimes, hammering out reports at home.
Sure.
Just depends.
Sure.
So.
And how many locations do you got? Like, I guess local liquor stores, or how many locations like that are you in? And how far is that? Not just Wichita. How wide is that net?
So we are just Kansas, Missouri at this point.
Okay. Yeah.
But we are in virtually all the bigger liquor stores. Some of the smaller ones, maybe not.
Yeah.
But yeah, we sell, I think, 70% of our beer is sold in the greater Wichita area.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
What do you guys have plans? Like keep expanding different states, other liquor stores, or just slowly but surely as it goes?
Right.
Yeah.
Kind of the turtle method, as my dad would say.
Yeah.
That we want to grow, but we don't want to force it so much. It's got to be kind of natural. So.
Sure. So I want to talk a little bit about the building you guys are in. So I read up a little bit on the website, but I'd love to hear it from you. So I'll just give it quick highlights. It's an old 1917 building just south of downtown El Dorado that dates back to World War I. And I'll let you kind of tell the story. I have some notes if you get lost along the way, but I'm sure you know it pretty well. So
so this building has been a lot of things. Downstairs, it's been a grocery store, a bakery, a creamery, all the while upstairs from 1923 until just after World War II, it was a brothel. And the reason that went on so long is because the local police were more interested in shutting down illegal beer joints, so they didn't care about the brothel.
Sure.
And it was $2 at the time.
Interesting.
So yeah.
Inflation.
Yeah, we checked for inflation at the time when we first started, and we were surprised to find out that was $28.50. So
interesting.
Yeah,
we'll let that.
But Wichita was $1.
Gotcha.
So they had the oil money out there was big money.
Yeah, of course. That's super interesting. Just like the history of that, like how old of a building it was. So why was that building special in the first place? I think that Rick had ties to that. So why was that building so special to him?
Well, he found the building and it was in vast disrepair. I mean, it in the next few years would have collapsed. The roof was starting to come in, and he knew that he could buy it for pennies on the dollar and then save it. He's put in so much work. He replaced all the windows. He put in all the structural steel to support the roof. Just everything, new decking, all this stuff.
Sure.
And essentially saved the building.
Yeah.
So
did it go down to like the bare bones, or how yeah, I bet it did.
Yeah, and it's still kind of the bare bones. I mean, our walls are brick walls. There's no insulation in that building. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Does that make it any more or less difficult for production, or does that even have an effect?
In production, I mean, there's no air conditioning in production.
Sure.
So it's hot in the summertime. It'll be 130 degrees on the brew deck in the summer. So we have fans going, obviously, but in the wintertime, we do have a small heater back there. And then there's the boiler keeps everything quite warm, obviously, too.
Yeah, for sure. So that started in 2013 out in El Dorado. When did the Pourhouse open?
That would have been 2018, very end of 2018. So we got about a year in before COVID.
Yeah.
Yeehaw.
Giddy up.
Yeah.
Wow. It's interesting because I graduated college in 2015, and then I moved away for a year, and then we came back from Corpus Christi, Texas, and it seemed like there had been several other, and maybe I just wasn't paying attention before we left, but it was like, it seemed like then Hoppy Gnome was here and then like Central Standard. And I don't know when exactly, I can't remember those timelines, but it's interesting. You guys predated that by even several years.
Sure. So it was River City, was kind of the OGs.
Yep.
And then Hank is Wiser out in Cheney, and then Wichita Brewing, and then us. And then after that, it's kind of a blur because we were too busy working on our stuff. But I know it was Hopping Gnome and CSB.
Yeah.
Third Place. There was Limestone. I mean, all of these breweries, they all started popping up, and we all help each other.
Yeah.
I think the first time Tori needed to sit down and do his federal gallonage tax, I said, "Well, I got to do ours. Let me just drop by, and as long as you have internet, we'll just print it off together and do them." I don't mind showing you what's going on. And
yeah, for sure.
So, it's not that hard. You just needed somebody to show that to you. And, Jeremy did that from Wichita Brewing. He looked over our application for the TTB, the Brewers notice that we had to get federally. And so he came out and looked it all over for us and checked out our stuff. And
yeah, I love that.
So, yeah, we all get along pretty well.
Yeah, I've been relatively tied into kind of like the startup ecosystem, and it's cool to see how all of those people help each other. And I mean, I consider you guys there, but also like your own little brewer ecosystem. And I interviewed Stacy, I don't even remember, probably a year or two back. Yeah. And she was telling me some of those stories about, oh, we ran out of so-and-so product, call one of your buddies down the street and help each other out. And I mean, a rising tide raises all ships. So it's awesome to see.
We kind of say it's a little bit like wrestling with your brother. Yeah. Like you want to whoop his butt, but you want him to do well too.
Sure.
We want to make a better IPA, of course, but we also want to make sure everybody else has great product too.
For sure. On that point, how often or what does it look like to submit your beer to competitions, like locally or nationally? What is that? Do you guys participate in those? What does that look like?
Well, so everybody has a different view on it. We do submit beers to those. You pay a lot of money for feedback that you typically already know.
Sure.
And it sometimes, for instance, we submitted our coffee porter, and we get, these top level judges, and there'll be, 3 at a time, and we'll get notes back that say too much coffee, and then the next one says not enough coffee.
Right.
I'm like, guys, you're supposed to have a discerning palate here.
Yeah.
So they're just people. It's all subject to what did you have right before that, or what time of day is it, or were you thirsty, or all of these things come into play. So it's very subjective.
Oh, for sure.
So, yes, those are important, but at the same time, making a good product and getting it out the door is just as, if not more important.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm I don't have a very sophisticated palate, I would say. I know what I like and what I don't like, and there's not a lot of stuff I don't like. So that's helpful. But it's interesting. You said Rick had like whatever the level judge thing. It's like I don't know if that's like the sommelier for beer or whatever that is, but that's super interesting to me. I have friends that'll do blind taste tests and they can pick out the different stuff. I'm like, well, I know this is dark and I know this is a light beer, but like I couldn't pick out every little flavor, but that's always been super interesting to me.
Sure. And, we find at the brewery, we kind of have our own little super tasters, if you will. Mine is acetic acid, which is vinegar. I can taste that very quickly, and I can smell it almost immediately before all the other guys can. We have some of them will, that has DMS, and so everybody's got their own little superpower.
Sure. Yeah, that's fun. That makes it fun. How has the reception to the Pourhouse been? And then how was it through COVID? I'm sure that was really difficult. So.
Well, we were a restaurant during COVID downtown, so it wasn't great.
Right.
But we were there, and people still came out, and we have that little drive-through window with no drive-through. Yep. So we used that to shove a lot of food out the door.
Yeah.
People could buy beer to go, and we got a lot of support from the local community. So we truly appreciate that.
Yeah.
But out in the suburbs, I think it was a little different story for. We've talked with, again, Jeremy at Wichita Brewing. He said, sales were definitely down, but takeout orders were strong, but they lived, people lived around the block from there. And down here, all the attorneys and accountants they all worked from home. So it made it hard.
Yeah, for sure. So you probably saw, probably a dip in revenue or whatever for that location. Did sales of beer go up at all during that time, or did that balance out at all?
So they were about even, and the only reason is people were buying more beer to go,
Right.
but they were also looking for, Bud Light 30 packs and things like that, which we did release a 12 pack that year, which was perfect timing. Yeah. It's as if we knew that was coming, but it was just blind luck. But we'll take that any day of the week.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, you need a little luck every now and then.
Oh, need a lot of luck.
Before we get into all of your flavors and kind of that whole part of things, I did want to ask, we mentioned light beer. So what is your view on light beer? How do you?
Well, I mean, people need to stay hydrated. No, really. I do love a big Russian Imperial Stout, and those are great, but you can drink one or two of those because I've drank 4 of those and promptly brought the meat in from the grill, set it on the table, and went to sleep. So it has its place.
Yep.
But as far as lighter beers, we'll take those when we go fishing. For instance, our Teeter Rock Kolsch is a nice light. It's a 4.7. We kind of call it like a domestic with a little more flavor and bite.
Sure. But
it's a great German beer. Yeah. And I can still topwater bass fish and not miss my bass. Right. If I'm doing that with our IPA, which is 7.7%, after a couple of those, my reactions get substantially worse.
For sure.
So yeah.
Yep, that makes sense. So I want to get into a few of the flavors. Some people will probably recognize because I think they're pretty well known around Wichita. But you have the Warbeard Irish Red, High Beam IPA, Teeter Rock Kolsch, like you said, and then the Re-Orange. So talk a little bit about flagship flavors. How long have those been around? Was one of those like kind of the first or second one kind of in the arsenal? What did that look like?
So we made a lot of these from the get-go or very, very close to that start. The Warbeard was originally called, what did he call that? It was a terrible name. And I said, Rick, you have to let me work on the naming. You just work on the beer. It was Roughneck Red. And I said, well, alliteration is great, but let's go with something different. Yeah. Same great beer. Yep. And that was around from the get-go. The Kolsch, we did name it Teeter Rock because of there is a rock in Greenwood County where my mom lives out that direction, and by literally naming it that, it's on tap in Eureka, Kansas. You don't see craft on tap in Eureka, Kansas typically, but they're like, give me some Teeter Rock.
That's cool.
So it's a point that most people know in the Flint Hills, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
High Beam, that was around from the get-go.
Okay.
We came up with the name, but all of the logos we came up with in a course of a week.
Oh, wow.
We had a fellow that designed the logos, but he was getting a divorce, and so he needed cash. So I would literally go over after work, and it was $100 plus snacks. So like Monday it was $100 plus Twinkies. Sure. And then it was like $100 and like chips and salsa. Mm-hmm. And so we did the whole week like that, and ended up with our logos. And so it was a great deal for us, ultimately.
Oh, for sure. I think especially the Warbeard is iconic, I think. I mean, you see the can and you know what you're getting. Like you can see it across the room and be like, okay, I want that. Yeah.
And that was a light and sound company.
Really?
We co-branded with this particular designer. He had a light and sound company in Wichita. And in fact, our sales guy's been with us, Jay, been with us a couple of years now. He saw a Warbeard light and sound. He said, somebody ripped that off. And no. That's actually a really old sweatshirt they're wearing, and that was around before us.
Oh,
but
wow.
We have an agreement now. That's cool. So
it's really cool. No, that's awesome.
Worked out.
What would it take for something to bump up to a flagship? Or would you ever expand that? Or
is
that even a thought? It's just, it is what it is.
So actually, we have a new flagship sitting here on the table.
Brings us to the...
Yeah, right.
There we go.
We just saw... We see a need for it, Was it Robots? We see a need, fill a need, right?
Yep.
That show.
Yep. Oh yeah.
And so we saw a need for a good, not citrusy but more tropical wheat beer. So Wayward Sun, SUN, spelled that way, is just one of those that we felt would be a great year-round. Definitely kicking it off in the summertime, though, is a good jump start to it. But we haven't had a good wheat in some time. So.
That's awesome. And it'll be 80 degrees today, so got that a little bit of summer feel. It's going to be nice to crack one open later. You also have a bunch of seasonal flavors, so I'm going to read off some of the names just because some of them are kind of interesting, and you can talk about whichever ones you want. But
sure.
And I'll probably pronounce some wrong. But Kuvalda is a Russian Imperial Stout. We have Devil's Blend Coffee Porter, Maniacal Monk, which is a Belgian triple, Day Pass, Angel's Blend Coffee Kolsch, and Plum My Lady Sour. So you got it. You mentioned a little bit of sour earlier when we were talking, but which of those is your favorite? Are there any interesting stories behind any of those?
I mean, there's a few. I don't know. Some of them we probably can't put on the podcast, but I will say, so the coffee porter, we made that as a joke, actually. It was, we were in the back of a flea market is how we started. And so you'd walk in and there's like pink flamingos and sombreros and anyway, all this junk in there. And then in the back was, these two goofballs making beer. And so we thought, well, let's, there's no holidays at this time. We need to make a beer for something. Groundhog Day is coming up. Let's do a little porter for winter, a little coffee for spring. Screw it. Let's just do it. It seemed to work quite well, actually. Yeah. So we did sell that year round until recently. And then we just make that Q4, Q1 during the cold months. And then Q2 and 3, we do the coffee Kolsch and the Angel's Blend. So Devil's Blend, Angel's Blend.
Sure.
And the coffee Kolsch has the same amount of coffee in it. And you would not think a Kolsch and coffee would go well together, but we tried it one time from somewhere in the Southwest, is New Mexico or Arizona. And they did a coffee Kolsch, and I thought, holy cow, this really works. And people take it, particularly in the summer, to go camping. Because one, they can start drinking first thing in the morning, but they also get their coffee, their caffeine fix. So
absolutely. How much caffeine is in that? Do you have?
It's about a half cup of coffee.
It's not bad.
So I mean,
that's awesome.
Drink a 6er, you can be wide awake drunk. So be careful.
I have not tried that one. I'm definitely going to try
that one.
Well,
try
not the wide awake drunk part, but just one or two of the actual beers. So what goes into, I guess, experimenting with these flavors? How often do you guys try something like that? Is it just you get inspired by seeing something else or maybe read about something? How does that process work?
Any and all.
Yeah.
So we'll try a beer somewhere and we think, man, that's great. What if we did this and made this tweak? And then, at our staff meetings on Monday mornings, there's 8 of us sitting around the table, but it's, marketing, it's sales, it's brewing, it's packaging, everybody's there. And so we'll talk about things that we've had that are very notable, or things not to try. We're like, ooh, maybe that didn't work out how they wanted. And so those give us inspiration. And then, Rick and Travis will, speak nanu to each other and talk about everything and figure out a recipe that works. And then we will tweak it. This recipe here for Wayward Son, I mean, we'd been making that for the last year and a half, just trying to tweak it and play with it. A little different hops, a little different, timetable on the hops, and it takes a while to get it just right. So,
are there any disagreements in the office about?
Yes.
Like 3 months ago, you're like, "This is perfect," and then they're like, "Well, it needs to tweak it some more." Like,
right?
Is there a little bit?
No, there always is, and so we usually can come to a consensus on things. But
when you're experimenting, do you make like, I don't know, 1 keg worth or something? So if it's not good, you can toss it, or whoever loses the bet is forced to drink the bad keg. What does that look like?
So if it's really bad, we'll dump it.
Yeah.
But if it's, it's certainly palatable, we will put that on tap, and then we can see by sales data what has worked well. There's always going to be somebody try it, but if it left really quick, we thought, okay, we're on to something.
Yeah, that's a good
Let's
idea.
look at that. So we can quantify those things at both, our Wichita and our El Dorado location, which is nice.
No, that's super interesting. Yeah, I want to say it was like one of the beer fest things, maybe Oktoberfest or something like that. It was over in the parking lot by the boathouse, but it was like a tent, and there was a bunch of the different beer people.
Blocktoberfest,
Yeah, Blocktoberfest, there we go. And it was interesting because some of them were just like, it was like a small batch thing. It's interesting to see, like, you really can quantify that, especially in the Pourhouse or wherever, the tap room, see how fast it goes. That's a really good way to do it. Let the market tell you.
Right.
That's awesome.
Absolutely.
That's very cool. So what does the team look like? It started out with just a few of you guys. Where are you guys at now, expansion-wise? Obviously, running a restaurant, there's a lot of employees there, but like
Right.
whatever the step above, waitresses, hostess, cooks, how many people are involved with everything?
So, man, total, I mean, we are, I don't know, 40 people
Yeah.
probably right now.
That's incredible.
You know, that does change in the restaurant daily.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
So,
Yeah.
I hate to say that.
Yeah.
At the main brewery, there's a dozen of us.
Sure.
But yeah, the total in the back, 8 people run the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then we have, you know, people up front in the tap room.
Yeah, for sure. How has the whole experience kind of from the beginning or recently, how has that differed from what your expectations were? Or did you have any expectations other than, I love beer, this is going to be awesome, we're making a brewery?
I mean, we certainly hope to make a good business out of it.
Yeah.
We honestly didn't really know what to expect. It just hadn't been done a lot in Wichita.
Right.
There were no real production breweries at the time. So Wichita Brewing was working on a production, but I think we beat them to market by maybe a month or two.
Sure.
As far as having a canning line and sending everything out to liquor stores. There had not been a local brewery do that other than some growlers here or there or whatnot,
right.
or the one-off cans, but not supplying, you know, case stacks at,
Sure.
you know, Jacobs and R&J and Goebel and, you know, those bigger liquor stores. And so we were the first to do that. In fact, we didn't even have a truck. I had to call my friend Jeremy Johnson. I said, hey, do you have something that we can take all this beer in? He says, yeah, I'll send a flatbed out. So we loaded up. We quickly looked for a truck and found one for $2,500.
Nice.
And it needed a new transmission. So we traded like 20 cases of beer for a transmission, and it worked out really well, actually.
Yeah.
So
yeah. That's incredible. Running the restaurant, was that difficult, I guess, coming back off of COVID when you guys could open back up? I mean, are you guys seeing the same thing as far as like just finding tough to find people to work, or?
Yeah, it is definitely tough to find good people. It
seems to be industry wide, but I was just curious. Yeah.
And I would say it's tough to find good people anytime.
Sure.
Because if they're really good, they're working somewhere else.
Yep.
Or they've started their own place. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's been extremely tough though.
Sure. I believe that. What advice would you have for somebody that wanted to go into brewing? Is it still a good time? I mean, we've talked about several other, since you guys have even opened up around here, but is it still a good time, or is it always a good time to make beer?
My dad would always say, if you're good at it, there's always room for you. Mm-hmm. I would tell someone to just stop and maybe run the numbers or talk with the other local breweries. We're pretty open to each other. We'll tell you what we think. But if you've got a niche that maybe is not being met down here, we'll be upfront and say, hey, that might actually work. You should give that a go.
Sure.
But I mean, I would use caution.
Yeah.
But there could be room.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe that. Was there like a North Star? So I think whenever I'm doing this podcast or doing my newsletter or anything like that, I'm always like, okay, I see the way Morning Brew is doing their newsletters or the way Tim Ferriss or Joe Rogan does their podcasts. Was there like a North Star brewery? Like, okay, we can kind of model it after this. Maybe like, I don't know. I know Colorado was kind of early on some of the craft beer scene, but like, was there anybody like that you guys kind of looked after?
Well, yes. And it worked for a little while. It was Tallgrass. And we looked up to them because they were a fast growing production brewery in the state of Kansas. And so we looked up to them, and then it was unfortunate. There were a lot of smaller breweries that had started and they had expanded quickly. Mm-hmm. I think they did a great thing in Kansas. It just, unfortunately, you know, when you expand quickly, you got to have a lot of capital, and, you know, it just is one of those downturns that gets you. I think if they'd had extra capital, they probably could have made a go of it.
Right.
But yeah, he paved the way for a lot of us.
Yeah.
Just as unfortunate he's not still around. That name is still around though. Wichita Brewing makes their beer.
Saw that. Yeah.
So
yeah, I think that's cool too. I know Wichita Brewing Company does that a little bit, but like Aeroplanes closed.
Right.
And I loved their wheat beer.
Right.
So it was like for the longest time when they first went out of business, it was like I went and bought a couple 6-packs because I'm like, I don't know if I'll ever get this again.
Right.
And then Wichita Brewing Company kind of came in.
Sure.
But I love the support with you guys have for each other and just everybody in town. I think that's super cool. But and I guess that serves as a warning too. Like we just named 2 breweries in the Wichita, Kansas area that didn't make it. So there's definitely a warning there. But Is there anything else you'd like to talk about regarding Walnut River? I kind of have some other questions I cherry picked from other podcasts, but are there any other stories that come to mind or anything specific you'd like to talk about?
There's always stories. And if we had years and years to talk, we'd probably still have stories.
We'll do a round two at some point.
Right. Yeah. No, I would just say it's been a fun ride so far, just to go once in a while. I'll go back and look at photos of when it was just 2 or 3 of us, and the tap room, or there was no tap room. It was literally 2 stools, and the wood on those stools was literally my neighbor's tree that fell in her yard, and I took 2 cuts of it. Mm-hmm. I asked her if that was okay, and she said sure, and we took 2 cuts of it, and I screwed it to these stools and made it part of, it's not walnut, but it was a tree that fell down. There was no pin oak, actually.
Sure.
And then the chunk of oak that we had as our counter got off of Craigslist at the time.
Nice. For
$60.
Great deal.
And just things like that. We would deliver beer in a Mini Cooper. Turns out you could fit 10 6th barrel kegs in the back of a Mini Cooper.
That's impressive.
The skinny ones, right? Yeah. But empty, the record is 27.
Wow.
So that was our original delivery vehicle, and we bottomed that one out.
I believe it.
Routinely. So, yeah.
Yeah. I guess before we move on, I do want to talk about the names a little bit more. So Walnut River, talk about that just for a minute.
So when we first started, Rick had named it Heartland Brewing Company. And I said, Rick, did you check any IP? Did you get on Google? He says, oh, no, not really. Let me double check. So 0.7 seconds later, I said, well, there's a Heartland Brewery in Manhattan, New York. And so I called that fellow. I said, hey, we're Heartland Brewing Company in Kansas. Any chance, we can use that name? We realized you were there first. Any chance we could use that name and just not go to New York? He says, I appreciate you calling. No. Like, all right, fair enough. So we tried to find another name, and I mean, it is not easy in the brewing community. In fact, we have a beer on tap right now that's called Beer Names Are Hard, just because it's so hard to find a beer name. But to find a brewery name, we finally got to Walnut River is what fills up El Dorado Lake, which is the municipal water supply. Yep. And that's the whole reason we're in El Dorado. Right. And that's what we went with.
Very cool. I love it. And it's also interesting. You could probably sue that other company for false advertising. They're not in the Heartland.
Well,
here in New York. So.
I think he has deeper pockets than we do.
Yeah, probably. We'll let that one stay too. Okay, so these are some questions I cherry picked from a couple of my favorite podcasts, like Tim Ferriss and so forth. But what is something you often recommend to people? That can be books, podcasts, TV shows, music, beer, whatever.
For me, I would say always make sure to get a mentor or 2. And I had those in my grandpa and my dad, and they passed away in 2020. Okay. Not COVID related at all, just separate issues. So
hear that.
Thanks. And it was one of those deals where I realized I needed some other business input, people to bounce things off of that didn't have skin in the game, but just would give me an honest opinion. Sure. And so I now have a couple of mentors for that. But I would say continue to learn with podcasts, whatever podcast that is. And I kind of front load that in the morning. I'll listen to podcast or sometimes talk radio. Mm-hmm. And then I try to listen to music on the way home just to unwind a bit and shake it off and get that day out. So I don't try not to bring that in the door, but it's easier said than done sometimes.
For sure.
So when you're at work, be at work. When you're at home, be at home. It is a little hard to do as a small business owner because you're getting texts and calls all the time. Mm-hmm. But anyway.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have any specific podcasts you'd recommend?
Right now, I've been listening to a lot of fishing podcasts.
Oh, interesting. I have not listened to those before, but
and
that's
I've been listening to those on the way back. So
yeah.
We've got a guy's fishing trip coming up. So I've been kind of catching up on a few things.
Well, I know. I mean, I enjoy fishing, but like my father-in-law and my brother-in-law are like deep into fly fishing now. And so
it's fun.
I'm sure there's a whole, I haven't actually tried it yet. I need to go try it, but
it's a good time.
Yeah, they love it. What is your favorite failure in any aspect of your life?
So we're going to condense this story down. It's about a 2 or 3 beer story.
Oh, wow.
But
we got 6. So
we do, but, the abbreviated version was, my first year at Wichita State. Let me back up. My high school career, I'm not Einstein, but I did okay. And I didn't really have to study. So I didn't really learn good study habits.
Sure.
And it's not anybody's fault but my own. And so I went to Wichita State my very first year thinking it would be the same. It is not. And it turns out if you drink beer and go fishing, you don't pass classes. I'm not sure if anybody else has realized this, but I certainly did in the fall of 94 and carried that over to the spring of 95. And then eventually Wichita State said, maybe you should go. So I took a job that summer at Yellowstone National Park.
Oh, wow.
And it was terrible. It was beautiful. I mean, there's fishing, and we certainly drank our fair share of beer. And then I looked around one morning, and these guys, some of them were 40, 45, and they're working, for not much money.
Sure.
And it just this is not a life that I want to have. Yeah. And so there was one job I quit with no notice, and I worked in the restaurant, and that's part of where I was like, I don't want to do a restaurant. Anyway, you see where that went?
Oh, for sure.
So I left at 2:00 in the afternoon, and I drove straight through. And Denver's about halfway. I don't know if you've driven to Yellowstone. It's a bit of a drive. Mm-hmm. So I hit Denver at midnight, and I continued on. I made it into Wichita about 10 a.m. I tried to take a nap. It didn't work out. And then I successfully removed my head from my southern orifice. I went to Butler, made Dean's List while taking 19 hours and working 40 hours a week. And then I got let back into Wichita State, and, the rest is history. But I just needed to know that I could do it.
Sure.
And, I needed to just stop and think what I want to do with my life. So,
for sure.
Yeah.
I think that's a great lesson learned. So that's a good story.
Yeah.
Interesting. I have not been to Yellowstone, but I've driven up, Pacific Northwest. So I know that's a long drive.
That's a lot longer than that. Yeah.
The flip side of that question, what is your definition of success?
Ooh. I think it changes. It would be great to put it as a certain point and say, at this dollar amount with this family, and the version of success in my head as a kid was the Michael J. Fox in Secret of My Success, the Kansas kid in New York. And it's terrible, right? There's no company jet for guys like me. Our company jet currently is a Dodge 1500 sitting down there. And so, but for me is being comfortable financially, but with the time to be able to spend with my family. And the tough part about that is you're trying to do all of that while your kids are younger. And then by the time you get to the point where you can spend more time, your kids are grown. So I will say the really nice thing about having 3 partners is we try to make sure that you are still taking time with your family. And it is required that you take at least a week off. You should take more, but we want to make sure, I don't care if you're playing games in your underwear downstairs for a week, just don't come to work.
Sure.
And that's truly important. So we will cover for each other if it's an event or we've got a birthday. You do not live to work, you work to live. And that is very, very true. So
that is very good advice, especially as I record this podcast on the side and I have my full-time job and I've got 2 kids and a third on the way. So
okay. Well, congratulations.
Thank you so much. That kind of covers the next one, but I'll go ahead and ask it anyways because you might have something else to say. But tell me about a life motto you live by, or what is some of the best advice you've received? And you mentioned mentors, and you just had a great one there. But is there any other advice that maybe you received along the way?
Man, I will say, my dad. He keeps coming back up, but he taught me a lot of things. My mom did too. I don't want you to think that she didn't. Business wise, I really looked up to my dad. And he said, if you fail at something, the sin is not the failure. The sin is not getting back up. And he is just get up, dust yourself off, and go again, because now you know a way not to do it, and continue to grow. And so he said, just don't be afraid of failure. Don't let that hold you back.
Yeah, I love that.
So,
what is a habit that you've developed over the past few years that's most improved your life?
Honestly, trying to be a lot more organized and writing things down. My memory is not as good as it used to be. I like to think that it is, and at the time I'll go, yeah, I'll remember that. I'm not going to remember that. So if it's not either written or logged into my phone, I will not get it. And my wife will tell you I'm not the most organized person. In fact, my marketing guy and I were just talking about this before I came over. So that has been a big thing to me. And we joke about becoming a real company. Like one day we'll be a real company and like have, employee handbooks and things like that. And so someday. We do have some of those things, sure. But because it was just one of those, everything was in a hurry to start up and move and go, and we've got to do this. And so, yeah, be organized. And if you do that from the get-go, I think you'll probably turn out a lot better than I have. So
that is, I think that's something I need to work on as well. So I get it down sometimes, but it'll be on 50 different sticky notes all over my desk. And then it's like, okay, then I compile it into one list, and then I either lose that list or I just forget I have it. And then there's 50 things that are,
Yeah, I'm working off of 2 notepads. I'm down from like 6.
Yeah,
which is good because I didn't know which notepad it was in.
Right.
So,
yep, there we go. My last few questions are about Wichita specifically.
Yeah.
So what is your favorite part of Wichita, or what's a hidden gem in Wichita?
Oh, man. I tell you, as far as favorite part of Wichita, I love watching how it has grown up since I was a kid. Because in the early 80s, you didn't go downtown for anything. It just, in fact, you might have got mugged, actually. You'd go downtown for the Riverfest to see the planes fly over and the fireworks, but there weren't things going on downtown. And now you can come downtown. There's always something going on. And it's not just downtown though. It's in different parts of the city. We have festivals, we have culture, we have life. And I love seeing that. I love seeing Wichita grow.
Yeah, I love it. I agree 100%. Is there anything you wish Wichita had that it doesn't, or what would you improve about Wichita?
Man, it is okay. It is a little tough, and maybe somebody can educate me here, but if you're trying to go out with your wife on a date on a Sunday night, I feel like there's not a lot to do sometimes, unless you're into eating, which I am, or if we are going out drinking or something, in which we don't. I get enough beer at work that most people don't say that, I guess. But so on a Sunday night, sometimes that's the one night we can get away, and the kids are old enough they can stay home for a little bit on their own, and. But I don't always find stuff on a Sunday night to go do. So, I mean, that's a small thing in the scheme of things. But
no, I agree. Yeah. I mean, I send out an email newsletter 3 times a week with news and events and whatnot. And
I get it.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But I think Mondays can be light. Like early in the work week can be kind of light, but Sundays are usually fairly light, especially compared to coming off a Friday and Saturday. So that's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
and that doesn't mean we need to all rush out and do something. I mean, it's a good time to catch up on Criminal Minds, whatever.
No, for sure. Exactly. Last question. What does Wichita mean to you?
Man, not to sound cheesy, life. I mean, it really is kind of a little oasis on the plains. It is home. It is where my family is. It is everything. And so when we have friends that, are not from here, and we say, look, you can live in New York and LA, but it costs you so much money. I said, why don't you live here and live reasonably and be able to fly to these other places? Mm-hmm. I said, and you can work remotely. Clearly you can do that now. Yep. And it's a great place to raise a family. So yeah, that is for me. Wichita is very much family and life. And those were the things, going back to my Yellowstone story, I didn't realize how well I had that with family here and how much I missed them until I didn't have them there, for a month or so. And yeah, it makes a big difference.
100%. BJ, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. I'm excited to try the Wayward Son over here. Carry on, my Wayward Son.
Perfect.
Yeah, everybody go get some Walnut River Brewing beer. Go to Pourhouse, and we'll have to have you on again. This is fun.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, BJ.
Take care.